Hi, and welcome to the When Women Fly podcast. Each episode, I have poignant conversations with women who fly, run, surf, ski, climb, or otherwise soar, and possess a passion for life that is infectious. These are honest and insightful conversations about dreams and reinvention, often in the face of uncertainty, doubt, or other impediments. We talk about busting paradigms, grit, working hard, and playing hard, all while building a community around the empowering metaphor of flight. I am your host, Sylvia Winter, a pilot, runner, mother, skier, list maker, and apparently podcaster. I believe that when we share our stories, own our fears, and dismantle our perceived limitations, the possibilities are boundless. Whether you're pursuing your passion or simply love the idea of possibility and wonder, this podcast is for you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Let's get started. Today, I talked to Patty Wagstaff, one of modern aviation's most recognized trailblazers and ambassadors, a woman dedicated to the sport and art of aerobatics. Her spirit and dedication have shaped her into a tough competitor and a world-class performer. In her own words, in her book, Fire and Air, she quotes William James to describe her life. Like a bird's life, it seems to be made of an alternation of flights and perchings. At an early age, her itinerant life led to living in Japan, New York, California, Switzerland, London, Australia, and Alaska. Patty has built a life of adventure and risk, requiring courage and dogged persistence. Following her dreams, even when no reward was in sight, her dedication has pushed the limits of aerobatic flight. Determined to succeed and to create her own opportunities, Patty has earned worldwide recognition for her accomplishments flying thrilling, low-level aerobatic routines in competitions and air shows before millions of spectators each year. Patty is a 6-time member of the US Aerobatic team. She is a 3-time US National Aerobatic Champion and the first woman to ever achieve this title. She flies as a stunt pilot for major motion picture and television projects, supports worthy causes in Africa, has been a demo pilot, and has even turned her flying skills into fighting fires in California. In 1994, Patty's airplane, the B.F. Goodrich Aerospace Extra 260, went on display in the Smithsonian Institution's National Air and Space Museum's exhibit, Pioneers of Flight Gallery, and hung on display alongside the airplanes flown by the Lindberghs and Amelia Earhart. She received the National Air and Space Museum Trophy for Current Achievement in Aviation. Patty now teaches people aerobatics at the Patty Wagstaff Aerobatic School in St. Augustine, Florida. She's an inspiration to anyone who has ever had a dream. She symbolizes the realm of possibility for those willing to pursue and to commit. She is witty and sensitive and fun to talk to. So with no further delay, my conversation with the legendary Patty Wagstaff. Welcome, Patty. It's an honor to talk to you today.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. You look like you're in a colder climate than me.
I do, don't I? Yeah, it's snowing and icy and
Oh, it's snowing. Oh my God.
yeah, we've got some early snow in New England.
Wow. Pretty.
Yeah, it is pretty. Well, I'm really looking forward to talking today. I wondered if you could take a minute and tell us about yourself personally, where you're from, and before we jump into the aviation journey, how your early years living in the US and abroad impacted you.
I'm Patty Wagstaff. I was born in the US. We moved around a bit when I was a kid. My parents met in New York, and then my dad was in the Air Force when they got married. So I moved to California when I was very young, and then we moved around, and he was an airline pilot, became an airline pilot, and we moved to Japan when I was 9, with California still being our main home. I sort of went back and forth, spent the summers in California part of the time, and but but we lived in Japan till I was out of high school, basically.
hmm I read that you had an early Catholic education, but opted out of continuing to college to pursue your adventures. Do you remember what role pursuing your passion played in that and sort of what was building up to that?
Yeah, I went to very strict Catholic schools from a pretty young age, and I really didn't like it. And they were girls' schools. They always sent me to these girls' schools until the very last semester of high school, and I hated it because I just the boys seemed to have more fun. They were doing stuff that I wanted to do, and so when it came time for college, I did try it here and there, but I just didn't. There was nothing that I just knew that my life wasn't going to go in that direction. There wasn't anything driving me toward staying in school. So I traveled. I moved to Australia, lived there for quite a while, ended up working at a university and taking some classes there, and then moved to Alaska. But I knew I was never going to end up in a cubicle. I just wanted to experience life.
Mhm. And your father was a captain for Japan Airlines, and he let you fly sometime when you were young?
Yeah, he let me sit in the left seat when I was quite young. I remember being about 10 years old when he first started letting me sit in the left seat. And his co pilot and engineer at the time, they were all Japanese, and Japanese people love children. So they thought it was cute. A 10-year-old was flying the airplane. Of course, I wasn't taking off or landing, but I was, I could sit there and I had pictures of, flying the airplane around and they just thought it was great. And there weren't the rules that we have today.
Mhm.
My home life was a little difficult. My parents didn't always get along and so on. But when I was in the cockpit with my dad, everything was okay.
Mhm. Did he give you confidence in the
Yeah, that was my happy place, and that was where he was happiest. It was always the best place to be.
Mhm, and did you get a sense of what his expectations were for you at that age?
No, he didn't have any expectations of me. They thought I would get married and have kids.
Right.
And I got married,
Yeah.
but they thought I'd have a traditional life. That's all they really knew.
Mhm.
Their didn't work. None of the women in my family had really worked. They weren't career women as they called them. They were pretty predictable.
Mhm.
So they expect, they just thought of traditional roles, I think.
Whereas sort of ironically, they exposed you to living in Southeast Asia and Europe, and then you had your multi-year period in Australia and then Alaska, so you actually had a very unconventional upbringing even though maybe they expected more conventionality out of you.
It was funny, because in a lot of ways they were very provincial and conventional, but in other ways they weren't. And it was, there was sort of this dichotomy. My mother and father both, they didn't want me to have any fear growing up. My mother's mother had a lot of phobias. She wouldn't fly in an airplane. She couldn't visit us because she wouldn't get in an airplane. She wouldn't go in an elevator. She was deathly afraid of thunderstorms. I'm not sure why exactly, but probably her Irish mother, maybe. So my mother was brought up to have all these fears, and she was really afraid that I would be like that. So from a young age, she always
Hmm,
she would sit me in front of a window and go, "Look at that beautiful thunderstorm. Isn't that neat? Isn't that beautiful?" And flying, she wanted me to enjoy flying because she didn't want me to have fear of that, even though she did. I found out later. They brought me up to have no fear of things. Funny.
yeah, so, I mean, it made an explorer out of you, an adventurer,
Yeah.
and so you moved to Alaska, you had some family there, your dad and your sister were there when you moved there?
Was still flying for Japan Airlines living there, and my sister was there. So I went to visit. I wasn't sure what my next step was going to be. I just knew that I wanted to do something different, and so I moved to Alaska, and that changed everything. Alaska is really the land of opportunity, and I ended up with this great job working for the Bristol Bay Native Association, and I had a job as an economic development planner. It's the kind of thing that today would be really hard to get without a college degree. And my job was to fly around, discuss with town councils in this region. There were 29 villages in the Bristol Bay region. They were mostly Eskimo, some Aleut, and some Athabascan Indian, and discuss with these small villages what their economic development needs were, kind of update what their needs were. And they were things like community center, boat harbor. Some people needed better electricity, pretty basic things.
Mhm, and that's where you learned how to fly or were first exposed to flying?
Yeah, that's where I started to learn how to fly. The first charter I took crashed at the end of the runway, and I said, "This is it didn't need to happen." I wasn't hurt, but nobody was hurt. But that's when I decided I was going to take lessons. So
Mhm.
dug it out of the snow. I found an instructor, begged him to teach me, and started taking lessons.
And I read that it just took you 5 years to go from private pilot license to a spot on the US Aerobatic team. How was your rise to that team?
I was at the age, I was just turning 30, and I was at the age where I really was looking for something to excel at. I knew I wanted to be good at something, I just wasn't sure what. And I figured that all my experiences in life would lead me to some place that I wanted to be. Aviation, I met my husband at the same time. He was a pilot, he was a lawyer, but he was also a pilot. He started teaching me to fly. He supported my flying, he helped me get my private license. And then there was this amazing student loan program where you could borrow, and I borrowed enough to finish all of my ratings, my up to my instructor rating, my seaplane rating, even part of my helicopter rating. The payments at the time where it was like 5% interest, and for every year you stay in Alaska, up to 5 year 50%, they'd forgive it. So you only had to pay half back. And so I got all my ratings at that, and then I started doing aerobatics, and my husband was very supportive. I said, I'm going to try this. This is what I think I want to do. I know I can be good at it. So and I thought, okay, maybe this is what I can excel at.
Hmm.
I wanted to be good at something.
And then your rise to US National Aerobatic Champion. Tell us about that journey. A lot of commitment and time.
I worked really hard for everything that I had. And I think at the time I remember people saying, well, her husband, he was successful, but he wasn't a billionaire by any means. And they're like, well, he helps her. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. I worked really hard. I worked really hard for everything that I did and everything I had and everything I achieved. And I worked hard. I treated it as a job. I was very methodical. I found the best people I could to help coach me. And I set a goal. Part of why I wanted to achieve US national champion was that no woman had done it. And they said a woman couldn't do it, even though it was, technically possible for all kinds of reasons. Women aren't aggressive enough, or the judges won't allow it, even though it's supposed to be, fairly objective scoring, but so on and so forth. So I really made it my goal, and it took 7 years. So
Hmm.
everything takes 7 years or 10 years.
And not only one time, but you tripled that to consecutively, correct?
As soon as, yeah, 3 times. As soon as I won, I saw a friend of mine. I wasn't sure. I knew I wanted to continue, but I saw a friend of mine at an air show not long after, and he said, you're going to have to do it again. And I said, why is that? And he goes, because they'll say it's a fluke. And so I made it my goal to win 3 times.
All right, that was a challenge then.
Yeah, it got harder. My mentor at the time said it's going to get harder each time because you're not going to be the underdog,
Hmm.
and it did. The points that I won the nationals by each time narrowed. Every time I won, it was by 10 points out of 12,000 points, something like that.
Hmm. And I'd love to dig a little bit deep into what exactly one does to be US National Aerobatic Champion.
Well, I think to be a champion in anything, it takes a lot of work, but it's also training the right way. When I coach people now, I'm like, you have to be methodical. There's nothing really magic about it. You might have a basic talent for it, but some of the most talented people that I've seen in aerobatics or in flying don't do well because they don't approach it the right way. They're not necessarily, and I keep using the word methodical, but you have to have a system, you have to have a plan, and you have to be able to let it go at the end of the day.
Hmm.
They get to bed with you every night. You can't take it personal when you win or lose necessarily. I mean, when you lose in particular, you have to look at achieving something as a sort of a job, really.
Hmm.
What do I have to do to achieve something? I have to practice, but I have to practice the right way. I have to find people to help me. I have to have good equipment.
Hmm.
You said about finding ways to do that. Yeah, some of the most talented people really I have seen haven't done well. Their heads got in the way. It's very
Hmm.
hard to master nerves and stress. And
Hmm. Yeah, I'm interested in the mental preparation. Did you have specific routines to get your mind focused entirely at the to the task at hand?
yeah, absolutely. I had to develop all these routines that helped me. And I read a lot of books, sports psychology books, and in particular certain sports that would be similar to my sport. I had to develop ways to train my mind because I was always very nervous flying in a contest. Some people were more nervous than me. And to overcome that was the biggest. The flying's not the hardest part
Mhm.
at all. It's the mental aspects of it. So you learn a lot about yourself in any sport, anything that you do. When you push yourself is where you really learn about who you are and what your weaknesses are, what your strengths are, and how to improve those things.
Were your weaknesses the pressure?
It started out being having no self confidence and having or so low self esteem, low lack of self confidence, and yeah, the pressure of letting and listening to other people, and you had to put all that aside.
Mhm.
In fact, I'm cleaning out my office, trying to dust and make it more organized and on my shelves, and I found this a cassette tape that I used to listen to, which was Zen in the Art of Archery. And I think I listened to that every night for a couple of years, and it really helped me get focused on my mission.
Hmm. And you actually had from your writings, it seems like you had East Asian influences in the way that you approached your life and maybe some of
Oh,
you know.
I'm sure that came from living in Japan and growing up over there. And Zen in the Art of Archery is about a German man who lives in Japan and starts studying archery with a Japanese master. And the basic message of it that I got was, look, there aren't any shortcuts here. You have to master each piece of this and each piece of this art, and don't try and take any shortcuts.
Mhm.
You have to be master of all of it, including your mental state and each aspect of the sport that you're in.
And aerobatics is also physically demanding. You're constantly operating under tremendous mental pressure, but in addition to that, you're having to execute maneuvers in a variety of conditions, and to do this, you need to be both a quick thinker and focused and also deeply intuitive. How do you train for that?
Well, physically, you do have to stay in shape for sure. And luckily, I've always been kind of wiry, and I'm athletic, and I love to stay in shape. And, I love to exercise and hike and whatever, ride bicycles. I also think because little, I'm like 5'3" and I weigh about 115, and I'm smaller than most of the people that do this. I think it's an advantage. I always thought it was an advantage for me as far as pulling G's, because they say women are better at G's. They've done a lot of research about G tolerance and women in the centrifuge and the military. And because we have a shorter distance from our head to our heart, our bodies are able to equalize it quicker. And so I always had more stamina than most of the people I trained with. And I don't know if I think it's partly my size. I always felt it was an advantage. I like pushing myself. So,
Mhm.
I mean, I'd be with people that were 10, 15 years younger than me, and I could still handle a lot more than they could in the airplane.
Mhm.
It's, I was sort of built for it.
And you also pioneered some maneuvers that had not previously been possible. Tell us a little bit about how you approach that, like the vertical snap rolls and things like that.
Well, I didn't pioneer those maneuvers. I did add some maneuvers in competitions that hadn't been done before. So a lot of what we do is really progress in airplane development. My career followed that. So when I first started, I flew these little wood biplanes like everybody else. And then, as a few years later, these composite airplanes are much stronger and much more capable and lighter. So they have bigger engines, lighter weight airplanes, so better power to weight. And my career followed the development of these airplanes. So I was really lucky that I was able to develop my skills along with better airplanes right from the beginning. But I'm glad that I started with the old kind of style planes too, that I've had that background. So a lot of it is not even about inventing new maneuvers, but about performing maneuvers in different ways or in newer ways.
Hmm.
And that's really always fun to experiment with. And I'm still doing that. I'm still trying to experiment with new ways to do them.
Your videos are incredible for many reasons, but one of the sensations as a viewer that you get is how quickly you invert and you just keep talking as if it's obviously completely natural and comfortable for you. And did that take a while to acquire that, being able to fly inverted and in all those different directions and just really have it be seemingly, and again, this is just sort of the impression from the outside, just you're completely your comfort zone.
Well, it's I've been doing this for quite a long time. I think I'm still getting better at it. Partly the airplanes have come so far, and I've been flying top airplanes for a long time, so I'm used to the speed that you roll. The roll rates that they have. So you can roll very like a in 1 second you can roll 360 degrees, and I'm really used to that. I like it. I've always liked to be inverted, stand on my head, and things like that. And it's just something I've done it for a long time.
Mhm. And where do you keep your eyes, your gaze?
You're always looking at something on the horizon, like a dancer does, always.
Mhm,
And when I'm teaching aerobatics, that's a lot of what we teach is where to look, because it's you're not just looking around and you just get dizzy. So you're looking here, here, or here.
mhm,
If you look at videos of me or some of the other aerobatic pilots, you'll see that their head's not really moving that much,
mhm.
sort of like a dancer.
You definitely notice that. Mhm. Like, you clearly have a very intentional gaze.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have read this about you and wondered if we could talk about it. It was sort of an interesting snippet in the flight journal, I believe. Wagstaff can be a contradictory personality. Many of her early years before she discovered aviation were spent in a series of wild adventures worldwide. The lifestyle and character she sketches in her reminiscences are those of someone who is permanently attached to impermanence. Change is her credo. And then this is a quote. Someone said air show pilots all suffer from ADD, and I think they're right. I was, she says, that's you, someone constantly in search of something I could grab hold of, but the focus never lasted. Then I discovered flying, much more important. I was introduced to aerobatics very early, and I knew instantly this was it. It wasn't a gradual thing. I just reached up and grabbed me, and I was gone. Aerobatics absolutely changed my life and made me into a different person.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's true today. That sounds like it's a pretty old article.
It was an old article, but it's sort of, it has this sort of a tinge of critique, but I thought it would be interesting to talk about.
It's kind of interesting. I think a lot of us are ADD. I'm still ADD, and I still want to jump to the next thing before I finish something. It's a challenge. And I think ADD people have certain abilities that other people don't have. There've been studies to say that we learn things a little bit differently because of the neural pathways and the way our brains process. It's also hard to sit down and stay with one thing for any length of time. So you have to adjust your life. Like I use sticky notes because I know that I'll have this thought and I'll forget it, or I'm afraid I'll forget it. I don't know if I actually will anymore, but I'll make a note. I'll do something else. I'll come back to it. So it doesn't have to be a real disability if you're able to use it in a way that's really positive. Like with aerobatics, our routines are very short, and competition routines about 6 minutes long, and an air show routine's no more than 12 minutes to 15 minutes or so. They say that ADD people are able to hyper focus, and you get into this tunnel, and that's all you see, and that's what you have to be able to do what I do and what aerobatic pilots can do. I can't say that we're all ADD, but I'd say probably a good portion of us are.
Mhm,
And that may go for race car drivers. I don't know. They're in a car a lot longer than we are in the airplane.
mhm,
Yeah, it's interesting. I've done a little bit of research on it, and I think it's an advantage in my case. It wasn't something I was diagnosed with as a kid because nobody did that, as a kid. But
mhm, mhm. When you look at retrospectively at what the friction that you experienced during that period, maybe that sort of speaks to you, and yeah, a lot of energy, right?
a lot of energy and a lot of interest in a lot of different things and
Mhm,
jumping around. And again, I think it can be a real advantage.
mhm. And for you, it was the real shift happened when you were exposed to flying, and then that, of course, opened up lots of opportunity, but that was a focus in itself.
Absolutely, and you feel when you're home with something, whether it's a person you meet or a thing that you do or an activity, you're like, "Oh, this feels right. This feels like home."
Mhm,
And for me, flying was the only thing that I had found. I'd been around boats and done other stuff, and it was the first thing I found that just fit.
mhm,
It still feels that way.
mhm. Another thing that I, found, which was a little while ago when you're in your book, Fire and Air: A Life on the Edge, you write in the first chapter about the fundamental elements of air, earth, water, and fire, and that you believe people are basically elemental and drawn instinctively to one or two of them. Air and fire are seductive to me. I feel them. Air and fire, my equation for the airplane.
Yeah, I do believe that we're pretty elemental by nature, and I don't know. I mean, a lot of people don't really believe in astrology, but astrology is very much about your elements. And I'm a Virgo, so I'm earth sign, and my moon and my rising sign are both earth. And it's not something I'm super focused on, but I give it all the benefit of the doubt. And I do feel that we're very, very elemental by nature. You know how it is. Some people just love the water. They want to be in the water all the time. They want to be under the water. And some people like to be in the air. So we're drawn to different things. Absolutely.
Most interviews with you are technical and practical in nature, like most aviators tend to be, but I'm really curious about the way that you position these elements in your relationship with them. It's almost sort of a spiritual realm.
Yeah, I think it's important to follow what feels right for you. People, I know with kids sometimes, say, what, or what's good advice for a kid, let's say. And I'll say, follow what feels right. Follow what feels good to you. What makes you happy? Don't try and I mean, within reason, don't follow the path that's going to make somebody else happy because you feel guilty or you're trying to please them. You have to follow what makes you happy if you're going to be fulfilled in life. And I think that that's got to be elemental in nature too, because who knows why we're drawn to certain things? I don't know. It's more than just being brought up around airplanes and flying with my dad, because a lot of kids do that. I hear parents all the time, oh, I introduced my kids to flying, but they don't have any interest. And so it's not just nurture, it's nature too.
Mhm.
It's what we're drawn to by nature. And it's a mystery. And it's an exciting mystery to find out what we're drawn to and why we're drawn. Who knows why we're drawn to it? Sometimes we don't know. And maybe we're not meant to. But as long as you follow that, I really believe that's part of the elemental nature of who we are and what we're meant to be doing.
I told you this when we talked earlier, but I have a 12-year-old daughter, and she's flown with me before, and she enjoys it, but I wouldn't say she has the bug. But when she saw your videos of you inverted and doing your moves, a light lit up in her that's more her spirit. I think getting from A to B up in the air for the sake of it is sort of more practical. But I think you're right. I think there are these things that you can't necessarily explain that it's really neat to see them in children because they're so raw and they're not censored by the way that culture or society has organized what.
Absolutely. And teachers at school and especially for girls. Girls are, I mean, like me, I was supposed to, they just assumed I'd have a more conventional life. That's why it's important to follow your own, you know, what guides you.
After your 3 national championships, the National Air and Space Museum awarded you a trophy for the current achievement in aviation, and your extra 260 was hanging in the gallery before it's still in renovation, I believe.
It's in the restoration facility now. I'm not sure where it's going to go back in. It's going to go somewhere in the mall.
But the point being, in the Air and Space Museum, you have your aircraft hanging effectively, when it's not in restoration, along with the Lindberghs and Amelia Earhart. And what did that mean to you to get that award?
Well, it's very surreal even to this day. I remember the first time I went to the museum and I felt a real affinity for the airplanes there, and I always felt something like that would happen to me, that I would be a part of it. I didn't know why or how. Again, it was just I can't explain it, but you just have these feelings, and I always felt maybe I'd be a part of that bigger picture of aviation. For me, it's like I don't have children. I have my air show kids that I've been close to for years, and I have godson and so on, but I don't have kids. So I feel like for me, not having kids, it's my piece of history. I'm really proud of it. I mean, but it's also surreal. It's also like, I don't really feel like it's me so much as it's a symbol of something else that's,
Well, it is you, and it is also a symbol. It does have a profound effect, if we can see it, we can be it, and that's a big message
yeah.
to girls, young girls. Yeah, it really is. It's an amazing accomplishment. So after your sort of height with the aerobatics and the championships, where did you go with aviation after that?
I really believe that you always have to have the next step in sight. I was worried that, so I competed full time for 12 years, and I was worried about all of a sudden being left with nothing. Maybe not nothing, but a focus or a goal. Because when you're competing or when you're in a, sport and you're serious about it, every day you wake up, you know what your mission is. Whether it's even in the middle of the winter when you're not training, you still know that next month I'm going to go train and I have to be prepared and I have to be in shape for this or whatever you have to do, get the airplane ready. And I was worried about that. I thought, gosh, all of a sudden it's going to be depressing. And I read about like the retiring athlete and how a lot of people sunk into these pretty deep depressions. And I don't feel like I'm one of those people, but I wanted to prepare for it. So I put all my energy into air shows. I had good sponsors for a long time and just flew a lot of air shows every year and tried to become a better air show pilot. Because when you're just doing, it's hard to do both. Some people do it very well, and it's hard though because the type of flying with air show flying and competition flying is quite different. So
Mhm,
I really focused on becoming a better air show pilot and flying more air shows and flying different airplanes. And so I carried it into that arena a lot more. I was very focused on doing that and not just all of a sudden. And it was still hard, it was still hard to wake up every day and knowing that you didn't, because you train differently for air shows. It's not the same. You don't have to train quite as much either.
mhm,
It still took 6 months to a year to not, to feel like I really lost something.
mhm. Is the air show audience a bit more forgiving because 'cause they're not judging you?
If you don't crash, everything you do is wonderful. So, we laugh about it because you go to a contest and nothing you do is good enough. You work hard to get a 10, and then you go to an air show, it's like, "Oh, that was wonderful," and you're like, "Really? Well, it really was wonderful." But I'm glad you think so. But there's an art to it too, there's an art to keeping the crowd watching you and keeping your show moving and choreography, and so there's an art to it, but it's people appreciate different things.
Mhm. And what triggered your transfer out from that focus?
I started with air show. I my first The first thing I did was an air show, so I always did both. I always thought it was important to do both because, your ego takes a big beating at the contest, and then again, you go to an air show and everybody tells you how great you are. So I thought, well, this isn't good. I don't wanna just be told how wonderful I am every week, or I don't wanna be picked on every week either. So I really thought the balance was important. Air shows are fun and they paid money. And so for having sponsors, you have to go out there and have a public fly in front of in front of spectators and advertise for your sponsor.
Mhm. So you would have your honest feedback and your supportive feedback, and
Yeah.
together that probably gave you what you to compete at that level, you need a support system. Where did you get your support from?
My husband was very, very supportive. Ultimately, we split up later on, but he was my biggest supporter.
Mhm,
He also was a kind of nerve wracking. He would pace around and he was so invested in it
mhm,
because he was there when I started and he helped me learn to fly and everything. So the first time I did win the nationals, he said, "I'm just not coming. I can't handle it. I'm too nervous. I'm making you nervous." I'm like, "Okay, good. Stay home." And he goes, "Ah," and I won. And he's like, "Ah, the first one you win, I'm not there." And I'm like, "I know. I'm sorry, but I had to do it on my own, really." And then you have a group of friends that kind of mentors and people that really want you to win. And
mhm,
you need to surround yourself with people that are in your court.
mhm. And where was home base during that time?
Anchorage, Alaska.
Oh, you were still based in Alaska.
Yeah, and then, we had a hangar in Tucson and a place there, and so I'd go down there in the spring, and, of course, as the years went on, I started spending more time away from home, which was hard.
Mhm. So you were there all year round in Alaska?
Yeah, so my husband had a law firm there. That was our home.
And then what brought you down to Florida?
So after I got divorced, I was living in Tucson full time, and I didn't wanna be there full time. It was too hot in the summer, and it was too dry and all that, so there's a really good aerobatic community here in St. Augustine where I live. There always had been, and I had been here a couple of times to pick up airplanes and thought, "Oh, this it's beautiful, it's on the ocean, it's a historic town, it's kind of an eclectic, artsy town," which I like, so it sorta had everything going for it, so that's why I moved here.
And tell me about your school that you started there.
It's been about 5.5 years or so. People had always asked me, "When are you gonna do a school?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't know." It seems like an awful lot of work and not much money, and things just kind of happened all at once. I was looking for something different, and the space became available, an airplane became available. A couple of students were calling me, and I thought, well, I'm just going to dive in, see what happens, and if it's right, it'll the details will work themselves out. And it's gone really well, and I've enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. I think we're doing a really good service for people, trying to make people safer pilots, and I've just enjoyed the people. We've had great students.
Mhm.
So that's been the most rewarding part. Most of the students are people you want to be friends with. I made some really good friends, and it's fun. You have this office that you go to, and people come in, and and it's all about aerobatics, and everybody's excited about it. So it's the right thing to do.
And what's the format there for our students?
So we have different courses. They can come in for 1 day, they can come in for 2.5 days, or 5 days. Or they can be, if they're more advanced, they can just do it a la carte. But we like students to come in and take a course, go through a ground school, and see where they're at, and train them for the basics, and then they can come back anytime. So we get a lot of repeat customers too.
Hmm. Sounds like a really logical, but also a really fun next phase.
Yeah, it's been really great, and it still gives me time to do a lot of other things that I want to do too. Like I am coming out with training videos with a company called Sporties. We've already come out with two of them, and I'm working on my third and fourth one right now, and writing the scripts for them, and then we film them, and then they produce them and market them.
Mm,
That's been really time consuming and exciting and hard, and rewarding and all that stuff. So that's a big push that I'm doing now too. So it's important to have something, us ADD types, we got to have stuff, all this.
something lined up.
I'm cleaning my office.
Right. And you have animals. Animals have always been a big part of your life.
Well, I'm down to one parrot.
Oh!
I know. I just lost my last little doggy about 2 weeks ago. She was old.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but it's funny, being here in my office. She's normally snoring. In fact, last time when we talked, the first time, I think she was snoring loudly.
I do remember that.
So she went to heaven. But for the first time in probably 25 years, I haven't had a dog, and going to take a little break. But my parrot's very ornery. He's 21.
A good match. And do you have horses there?
I don't even have a horse at the moment. So I'll probably get another one though.
Horses have been a big part of your life, threaded through your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So I miss being at the stable.
Mhm.
But it's kind of good to have just no pressure right now. It's kind of nice, except for my parrot. First time, it's kind of I'm actually sleeping better. She doesn't have to go out, and it's
Mhm.
interesting. But then people send me pictures of their puppies. I'm like, oh, stop. But it might be nice to have some freedom and do some traveling once the COVID thing's over, and
Yeah.
go to the South Pacific for a month in the winter, something like that.
Yeah, just feel some freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be welcome. So, this is a podcast where we celebrate the spirit of taking on challenges and reaching beyond predetermined heights. It's about passion and pursuing that passion. What is one thing you wish you knew, advice you would give your younger self?
I would say not to take things personally. It's important that you realize you're going to run into all different kinds of people, and not everybody's going to be in your side, and you're not going to win every battle, and you're not going to win every argument, and don't take any of it personally. People like you, great. If they don't, not everybody, you're not going to win everybody.
Mhm.
It's hard, I think, especially for women, to put those things aside, but just stay on your path, like stay in the golden path, and just keep doing your best.
Mhm. Do you think that in aviation, the gender bias are shifting, have shifted? Where do you see that going?
I think that people are trying to shift it. There are more women in professional careers in aviation. The percentage of women in aviation hasn't increased a lot, but I think that the women in the professional side of it has increased. There's still a lot of sexism, and we have a long way to go. And what you hear to your face and what they say behind your back is, I don't hear that so much because I'm really well known in aviation. That what I hear from about some of the younger women getting into it, and I don't know where that comes from, sense of insecurity maybe, but so we have a long fight to go, and we have to keep plugging away.
Mhm. That's a good segue into the social media question. How do you navigate your boundaries and social media?
Well, luckily, this has been a long lifetime thing. I didn't get this well known overnight, so I've been able to, and I've had some problems in the past. I've had some stalkers, things like that. I probably shouldn't even talk about, but very careful to separate my personal and my professional life.
Mhm.
People don't really need to know when I'm on a vacation and doing something. I'm pretty good at that. And I think that's
Mhm.
really important is to keep things separate.
Mhm.
You don't have to reveal everything. I'm just glad I'm not 18 and have social media.
Yeah, right? I think that's the scary thing is the children growing up these days.
But I think they're all so crazy and adventurous and doing all these crazy things, and you post it. I'm sure I would have posted anything, but luckily I was more mature.
Do you have any book recommendations? Anything you're reading these days?
Oh gosh, I read all the time. I listen to books all the time on Audible too. I'm listening to one now called Range, which is pretty interesting. And it's a new book. I'll look for it on Audible real quick while we're talking. It's by Daniel Epstein and it's called Range. And that's really interesting just about I can't even explain what it's about, but it's pretty good. I just listened to a book called Via Negativa, nothing to do with aviation, by Daniel Hornsby. It was a beautiful book. It's about a retiring priest. Hard to explain, but very good. So I mix it up with historical fiction to history to biographies and then I'll just listen to like Carl Hyacin. There's a really fun one called Squeeze Me. I'm going through my little reading thing, so I'm always reading at least one or two books. And my next one is probably going to be Year of the Monkey by Patti Smith, her newest. It's a short book.
Tell us a little bit about your work in Africa and Kenya.
Yeah, I've been training the Kenya Wildlife Service pilots in Kenya since 2001. So I've been to Kenya, I think, 10 times now. I don't get to go every year, but every 2 to 3 years. And I'll bring one or two instructors with me. And we'll train all the pilots in about a week to 10 days. Was last year. I brought two good friends, flight instructors, and we flew, the three of us in 5 days flew 65 flights
Wow.
with the pilots. Yeah. So we were flying a lot. They're real good pilots, but they're not, a lot of them don't have a lot of time, newer pilots. So we try and give them as many tools as we can to help them stay alive, stay safe.
Mhm.
And it's very tailored to whatever they need.
Mhm.
Bush airplanes when we're there. But it's been an amazing experience. Probably the most rewarding thing I've done. It's all volunteer, of course, but in return, I mean, I've seen all the animals. I've been all over Kenya, been on safari, fly over herds of elephants. It's fantastic,
It's incredible.
and they're wonderful over there. And it's such a nice mixed society too. There's no real visible segregation when you go out to dinner. It'll be black and white and people mixed, English Kenyans, different tribes. No big deal.
Mhm.
Feel that separation that you do when you come back to the States in a lot of areas.
Mhm.
I miss that when I get home.
Mhm. When I was 16, I spent a summer in community service work in Kenya, in Kakamega. And one of the curious things for them was simply the blue eyes and the strange white skin and the freckles and sort of the oddity. It wasn't, there wasn't sort of separation. It was just sort of curiosity, which I thought was a very different approach to differences in race than I was used to in the
There
US.
was no judgment about being anything, was there? I mean, it's just yeah, and the people are lovely, aren't they? They're just gentle and nice, and I mean, they have problems, tribal issues, but it's not the people themselves are wonderful.
Yeah, it's really an incredible exposure to be exposed to such a different culture. Incredible people.
Just really interesting. There are animals in there that barely been discovered, birds and reptiles, and
Hmm.
I've flown over it. I haven't been inside it, but inside the forest, but I'd love to.
Do you expect to go back?
Yeah, I do. We were hoping to go back next spring, but I think with COVID, they're very strict over there. I think it's going to be another year, but I do think we'll go back.
As they should be.
And I stay in touch with everybody pretty closely. So
Oh, I think we have to wrap it up, Patty. This has been so much fun. I want to ask how listeners can find out more about your school and other parts of your projects that you are and want to share.
I appreciate that. The easiest thing is just go to my website. It's pattywagstaff.com. There you can see videos that we're doing and where to get those or information about our school or any air shows. And I think it's a good website. It's a local company that does it in St. Augustine. It's called Ward Media, if I can plug them. They're really fantastic to work with. So that's the easiest thing. So come and see us. So yours,
Oh my gosh, it is on my bucket list.
why don't you send me an email and book a few days? Maybe in February when it gets really cold.
And do you take, children? What, can I bring my daughter?
Yeah, you can bring your daughter. Well, we have a mini parachute. We can take her for a flight.
Or maybe I'll just come by myself.
It's a beautiful town, and it's
Yeah,
a good place to come in the middle of winter when it's cold everywhere else.
yeah.
We actually train a lot of Cirrus pilots.
Oh, Patty, it's been an honor to talk to you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the When Women Fly podcast. My hope is that you leave this conversation with a sense of curiosity and empowerment to hold on to what is important and let go to what weighs you down. Stare fear in the face. If you like this episode of the When Women Fly podcast, be sure to share and subscribe and let us know what you think. We love feedback. Be brave, be bold, and fly. See you next time.